Have you ever hold someone and realize you're not trying to save them anymore, you're just trying to keep them here a little longer? You watched him die like that, right in your arms. And the worst part, he looked at you like you were the reason it all meant something. And 3 months earlier, you were sent to destroy him. Before all of this, Lizzy did not know this man's face. She knew his name, ports, his network, his rivals, the 3 accounts her father suspected he was using to move money through Daejeon. She knew everything about Jong-woo that could be written in a folder and handed across a desk at dawn. Her father had given her one mission: get close. Destroy him from the inside. Walk away before it burns. She did one of those 3 things. 3 months earlier, Yemin, her father, had called her into his study at dawn. That was always how it started with him. Dawn meetings meant the thing he was about to ask could not survive the full light of day. She sat across from her father and watched him the way she always had, quietly, giving nothing away. He had her Korean features, and her mother's had given her the warmth in her complexion, the fullness in her face that made strangers look twice and underestimate her the way men always underestimated beautiful women. She had learned early that this was not a disadvantage. It was the sharpest tool she owned. Jong-woo is expanding, her father said, without greeting. He never wasted words on greetings. His network now reaches 3 ports we consider ours. If we let him continue, you want him stopped. Yemin looked at her the way he always looked at her when she finished his sentences, not with warmth, more like a craftsman admiring a tool he had built. I want him destroyed, slowly, from the inside. Lizzy said nothing. He doesn't know you exist, her father continued, sliding a folder across the desk. You've never appeared in any of our dealings. Your name is clean, your face is clean. He paused. You are the only person I trust to do this without it coming back to me. She looked at the folder but didn't open it yet. And when it's done, Yemin said almost gently, everything he built becomes ours. She opened the folder. Jong-woo's face looked back at her, mid-30s, sharp jaw. Eyes that even in a photograph seemed like they were measuring something. He was not what she expected from a man the Daejeon underground whispered about, not in conversation, but before things get serious. He looked contained, like a man who had decided long ago how much of himself the world deserved to see and had never revised that number upward. She memorized his face the way she memorized everything. Thoroughly, without attachment, she told herself that then. She would remind herself of it many times in the months that followed. Getting close to Jong-woo was not the difficult part. Men like him kept their doors closed to almost everyone, but they kept them open to one thing: leverage. And the art that Yemin had spent years cultivating in his daughter was the art of becoming useful before becoming trusted. She came in as a consultant. A financial analyst with a reputation clean enough to hold up under inspection, and a network that had been carefully constructed to trace back to neutral ground. No fingerprints, no family names, nothing that would make a careful man pull back. Jong-woo was a careful man. Their first meeting lasted 11 minutes. He asked her 3 questions that had nothing to do with finance and 2 that did. The ones that had nothing to do with finance were the real interview. She answered all 3 without flinching and left before he could decide she was worth watching. That was the move her father had taught her. Leave before they want you to. It was the oldest trick: make yourself scarce before they've decided whether they need you. By the time they figure out they do, they've already convinced themselves it was their idea. Jong-woo called her back within 24 hours. The next 6 weeks, she learned him the way she had been trained to learn targets, patterns, routines, and pressure points. She cataloged every detail: who he trusted, who he kept at a distance, what made him go quiet in a meeting versus what made him lean forward. She was building a map. That was the mission. But somewhere in the building of that map, she started noticing things that weren't useful. The way he remembered the names of every person on his staff. Not just his men, the drivers, the kitchen staff, the woman who came in Tuesdays to handle the garden. He addressed them all by name, always. Never raised his voice. The authority he carried wasn't loud, it was gravitational. People didn't obey Jong-woo because they feared him. They followed him because he made them feel like what mattered. That bothered her. Targets were not supposed to be people she could respect. She filed the observation away and kept working. But then, there was a night he found her still at her desk at late night, running numbers she had volunteered to handle because 3 of his people had called in sick the same week. He stopped in the doorway, didn't come in, just looked at her for a long moment in that quiet, measuring way of his. You don't have to do that, he said. I know. Another pause. Why are you? She had answers prepared for questions like this. clean, deflecting answers that revealed just enough to seem genuine. She reached for one and instead she said, "Because it needed doing." He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he nodded once and left. She sat there after he was gone and stared at her own hands. That was not the answer she had prepared. As time passed, things started changing. She never planned to fall in love with him. That statement probably sounds obvious. Nobody plans that. But what she meant was something more specific. She had planned very deliberately not to. She had trained herself against it. She had a system, distance, and purpose. Jong-woo dismantled all three, without ever trying to. It happened in small pieces. A moment between them that was comfortable in a way she hadn't expected. The way he handed and cared for her was obvious that he had seen her beyond just being a consultant. She was not a woman who was accustomed to being noticed in ways that were quiet. The men in her world noticed things about her that were useful to them. Jong-woo seemed to notice things about her that were useful to her. It unsettled her completely. Evening, they ended up alone on the rooftop of his building. It wasn't planned. She had gone up for air. The walls of her own deception had started closing in on her that day, and she needed sky, needed space. He came up an hour later, didn't seem surprised to find her there, and stood beside her looking out at the city. They talked. Not about work. About small things at first, the way Daejeon the city looks beautiful, a book she had mentioned once in passing that he had apparently read since. His opinion on it that disagreed with hers in exactly the interesting way. Then larger things, what he had wanted before this life, what she was afraid of, that last one she hadn't meant to say. The words came out before the guard went up. "Becoming someone I don't recognize," she said quietly. "I think that's it. Waking up one day and not knowing which parts of me are real." Jong-woo was quiet for a while. "Then, I think about that too, more than people would expect." She looked at him. He was still watching the city, jaw set, something old and tired sitting just under the surface of his expression. She had seen men wear power like armor. Jong-woo wore it differently. Something shifted in her, and she couldn't shift it back. She stopped sending her father useful information without deciding to stop. That was the part that frightened her most in looking back. She hadn't made a choice. She had simply started, withholding, softening, sending observations so general they were useless. And each week that passed with her father's calls growing shorter and more impatient, she told herself she was still on the mission. But she knew. She knew the night Jong-woo looked at her across a table, just the two of them, a meal she had stayed for. That had stretched from business into something else entirely, and she realized she was not calculating anything about him anymore. She was just there, present, wanting nothing from the moment except the moment itself. She has not felt that in so long she stopped expecting to feel it. Tilda, when he reached across the table and covered her hand with his, the way you reach for something familiar, she did not pull back. She looked down at his hand over hers, and then she looked up at him. And Jong-woo, for the first time since she had known him, looked uncertain, like he'd surprised himself. "This is," he started, "you're becoming part of me. The one part I want to feel forever. Do you think any of this feel right?" "Yes," she said. That was all. That was everything. Jong-woo called her into his office on a morning, early light through the windows, the city already moving below, the particular stillness that Jong-woo's spaces always had. She has learned to read that stillness. It was not emptiness, it was attention. He was standing when she came in. He didn't look at her right away. He stood at the window with his hands in his pockets and he looked at the city from the window. Then he turned. "Someone has been feeding information out of this empire," he said. "For the last 2 months, maybe longer." He watched her face as he said it. She felt the watch of it even as she kept her expression still. Names, roots, account structures, things that only someone inside would know. Lizzy said nothing. "Been going through it for a week," he continued. "Trying to trace it, but nothing yet. The information that moved, it's old. Nothing recent. Whoever it was, they stopped." He paused. "Or they changed what they were doing." Room was very quiet. She understood in that moment exactly what she was standing inside. He did not accuse her. Neither did he even looked at her differently, not on the surface. But Jong-woo did not call people into his office to share information. He called them in when he had already arrived somewhere and wanted to see how they responded to the journey. She had 2 choices. She could deflect. She was good at deflecting, had been doing it her whole life, or she could offer something plausible, something that redirected, something that bought her more time. Her father had trained her for exactly this. The art of the room, the controlled response, the graceful pivot away from the edge. She opened her mouth, and she thought about the rooftop. The coffee. His hand over hers. The small good moments they both shared. She closed her mouth. She looked at him. He looked back. and something in the quality of that silence changed, shifted, became the kind of silence that happens right before a door opens or closes permanently. "Give me 2 days," she said quietly. Jong-woo was still for a moment. "2 days for what?" "To tell you something." She held his gaze. "I need 2 days to figure out how." He looked at her for a long time. She could not read what moved through his face. It was too controlled, too layered. But he nodded. Once. "2 days," he said. She left his office and walked to the end of the corridor and stood there with her back against the wall and her eyes closed, and she understood that the 2 days she had asked for were not really about figuring out how. She already knew how. She just needed 2 days to stop being afraid of what might happen after. She held it for 2 more weeks. The truth. She held it the way you hold something sharp, carefully, knowing that the longer you hold it, the more damage it does to you, but terrified of what happens when you let go. Her father called on a Friday. He did not ask how the mission was progressing. He told her it was time to move. He had a plan in place, one that did not require her anymore, and would bring Jong-woo's entire empire down in a single ambush strike. All she needed to do was make sure she was not inside the building when it happened. She sat with the phone long after the call ended. She thought about leaving. The decision was already made. It had been made on a rooftop, probably, or at a dinner table, or in 100 small moments that she had refused to name at the time. She went to Jong-woo that night. She told him everything, not in pieces, not the diplomatic version. All of it, her father, the mission, who she had been when she walked through his door, what she had been sent to do. She watched his face as she spoke, and she did not look away because she owed him that much. The right to see what the truth did to him. The silence afterward was the longest of her life. Jong-woo sat very still. He had a way of going completely motionless when something hit him. She had noticed this before but had always seen it from the other side, had always been the observer. Being the cause of it was something else entirely. Finally, he looked at her. And what she saw in his face was not rage. It was worse than rage, it was uncertainty. How much of it was real? He asked. Quiet, careful, like the question cost him something. Of it, she said. Everything after the beginning. Jong-woo, everything after I started knowing you, all of it. He looked at her for a long time. She could see him turning it over, looking for the lie inside the confession, looking for the angle. Because men who survived in his world survived by finding the angle in everything, and she had just handed him the most devastating reason to find one now. I need, he said, then stopped. I need time to think. You lied to me this entirely time. I'm sorry, Jong-woo, she said, then continued. I had no choice but believe me. What we've shared is real. I stopped giving out information because I couldn't go on with it anymore. You changed my heart. Please forgive me. At the door she paused. My father is moving soon. Whatever you decide about me, you need to prepare. She left without knowing if he believed her. Min moved 3 days later. He did not wait. He had never been a man who waited when he felt things slipping, and something had told him, with the instinct that had kept him alive through years in the underground, that something was slipping. He just couldn't that it was his daughter. He suspected it was something else, a leak, an informant, the fragile intelligence network that any empire develops when it operates at his scale. He moved early. Jong-woo was ready. Entirely, no one stays unprepared for the thing they know is coming. Lizzy had told him enough, and he had spent 2 days in a stillness that she now understood was not inaction, but preparation. By the time the first of Yi Min's men crossed the perimeter, Jong-woo's people were already in position. Lizzy fought. She had not told him she was going to. She had arrived at the compound that morning, armed, and when his lieutenant had moved to stop her, Jong-woo had put up one hand, a small gesture, and let her through. He had looked at her across the courtyard for a moment with something in his face she couldn't fully read. Not forgiveness, not trust, something still unresolved, but he had let her through. That had to be enough. The war was not cinematic. It was loud, close and fast. It asked everything of everyone involved and gave nothing back. Lizzy moved through it the way her father had trained her, efficient, focused, without hesitation. She had always been good at this. She and Jong-woo fought back to back for a stretch of 1 hour that she would never be able to fully account for afterward. Time does strange things in the middle of violence. She was aware of him, always aware of where he was, whether he was standing, whether he needed her to turn, and she knew he was aware of her the same way. There was something in that mutual awareness that felt like the most honest conversation they had ever had. Then the second wave came. She didn't see the shot. She heard it, the sound of something finding its mark, and she turned. Jong-woo was on one knee, hand pressed to his side. Still upright, still present, but not for long. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, the way he was breathing. She got to him, down beside him, her hands doing the things hands do in moments like this. And she was talking to him, though she couldn't hear herself over the sound of everything else. He looked at her. His hand came up, slow, deliberate, and covered hers where it pressed against his side. "Lizzy." "Don't," she said. "Don't do that, don't talk like that." "I need to say it." His voice was quiet. The fighting was still happening somewhere behind them, but it had gone distant. "I believed you. I want you to know that. I believed you from the beginning, I just..." He stopped, breathed. "I was afraid of what it would mean if I was wrong." She looked at him. "It was real," he said. "All of it." She pressed her forehead against his. She cried and yelled out loud. She held his hand, and she stayed there with him until he stopped being there. And then she stood up. Fought more with anger. Open up massive gun firing directly to the enemies. The war ended the way wars between underground men end, not with ceremony but with exhaustion, with the slow realization on both sides that the cost had exceeded what either had budgeted for. Yi Min's organization took significant losses, not enough to destroy them, but enough. Lizzy spent 2 days doing nothing. She does not remember most of those 2 days. She was present in her body and absent in everything else. She slept in short pieces that gave her nothing. She buried him on a Friday. Jong-woo had no family left to do it, no mother, no siblings, nobody who carried his name before he made it mean something in the underground. So Lizzy did it. She stood at the grave with his lieutenants around her, and she said nothing because there was nothing to say, and she had never been a woman who spoke just to fill silence. Afterwards, one of his men, a quiet, scarred man named Hak who had been with Jong-woo for 11 years, looked at her and said simply, "What do we do now?" She looked back at him. "We finish it," she said. She spent 6 days planning. The grief was there, she wasn't pretending otherwise, but she had learned from a lifetime of watching her father that grief and action are not mutually exclusive. You can carry one inside the other. You just have to decide which one is driving. She knew her father organization the way she knew her own hands. Every safe house, every supply route, every man on his payroll and where that man's real loyalty sat, because loyalty in her father's world was almost always conditional, and she knew exactly what most of those conditions were. She had grown up inside this information. She had been her father's greatest weapon. Now she was going to show him what that meant. Jong-woo's men followed her without question. She hadn't asked them to, nor made a speech, promised anything. They had watched her fight beside their boss, watched her hold him at the end. In their world, that meant something that didn't require words. She hit 3 of her father's safe houses simultaneously on the first night. Not to destroy them, to send a message. She needed Yi Min to know it was her. She needed him to understand from the very first move exactly who had come for him and why. He called her before dawn. She let it ring. The second wave, she took his supply lines. Every route her father used to move money and men across the southern ports. She knew them all, had heard them discussed at dinner tables since childhood. She cut them one by one with a detail that told his remaining allies something important. Whoever was doing this was not an outside enemy. This was someone who had been inside, skilled individual. The calls to her father's allies stopped coming. People who had built their safety on Yi Min's network started doing the quiet mathematics of self-preservation. By the 4th day, Yi Min had lost half his organization without a single face-to-face confrontation. His men were scattering and missing. His money was frozen. The alliances he had spent years building were dissolving the way things dissolve when the center stops holding quickly and without dignity. Lizzy didn't stop. She pushed harder on the 5th day than she had on the other days, because she understood something her father had taught her. A wounded man with resources is more dangerous than a strong man without them. She wasn't going to give him time to regroup, and a corner to think from. She was going to take everything, all of it, completely. The final push came on the 6th night. What remained of Yimin's forces met what remained of Jong-woo's, and Lizzy stood at the front of it. The way she had been present beside Jong-woo in that compound, back to back, aware of every person around her. She moved through it with everything her father had built into her, and she felt, with a cold and clarifying certainty, that this was the last time she would ever use these skills for anyone's purpose but her own. It was over before morning. She found her father in the last place, a small office in a building that had once been the administrative heart of his empire and was now just a room. Two men outside who stood down when they saw her, because they had already done the calculation and they know which way it had resolved. Yimin was sitting at a desk with nothing on it. She stood across from him and she let him look at her. Let him see what she was and what she had done and who have done it. She wanted him to have no confusion about any of it. He said nothing for a long time. Then, "You did all of this?" "Yes." Another silence. She could see him turning it over, the scale of it, the precision, the particular way it had been executed. She watched the moment he fully understood that she had not hired this out. She had done it herself, with his own training. "Jong-woo," he said finally. "Jong-woo," she confirmed. She let that sit between them for a moment. The name of the man her father sent her to destroy, and instead she fell in love. Now she killed with his ambition. She let her father hold the full weight of that chain of events. Then she leaned forward, not close enough to touch, just close enough to be unmistakable. "I'm not going to kill you," she said quietly. "I thought about it, I want you to know that, but killing you ends it, and I don't want it ended." She held his gaze. "I want you to live in what's left. I want you to wake up every morning in the ruins of everything you built and know that your own daughter took it from you, with everything you taught her." She straightened. "You took what I loved. I took what you loved. Now we're even." Yimin looked at her. For the first time in her life, she could not read his face. She didn't need to. She walked out of that room, and she did not look back, and the morning was already coming up outside, pale light, cold air, the city beginning its ordinary day the way cities do regardless of what has happened in the night. She stood outside on for a moment and breathed. In. Jong-woo was gone. That was not going to stop being true. She knew that. She was not walking out of this building into a life that had been repaired. She was walking into a life that has been permanently altered by a man she had spent 3 months trying to destroy and had instead spent 3 months becoming better. She was going to carry that. But she was going to carry it standing up. She walked. The city swallowed her. And Lizzy, weapon-turned woman, daughter-turned destroyer, spy who had fallen in love with the enemy of her father and choose him anyway. Stay tuned with Secret Mafia Love. Comment and share. I wish you all a lovely day.